Okay, so I guess this part we had seen in the last class, which is talking about adaptation. Before that, we had seen what is light and dark photosynthesis reaction. Now, the small and last topic from whole of this chapter, that is the experiments based on the photosynthesis. So that means to show sunlight is necessary, to show carbon dioxide is necessary, and so on. So these experiments will be discussed in this particular part. So instead of going over all this description, what I will do is I will directly go to the experimental aspect. So for example, you take a plant and then you destarch it. Now destarching is a specific treatment that in which the starch is depleted within the plant. Now we know within a plant glucose is formed by the process of photosynthesis. When it is excess of glucose, that will be stored in the form of starch within the leaves, and that starch is utilized whenever the plant has less amount of glucose or less amount of photosynthesis happening. So that's when the starch will become like a storage, and that will be broken down into glucose, and that will be converted into energy. So that starch is the reserve food material for the plant. So when you destarch, that means you keep a plant in darkness for certain number of hours. Usually it is like 4 to 6 hours, or it can be 2 to 3 hours sometimes, depending on how much destarching is required. So keeping this plant in a dark will not allow that particular plant to do photosynthesis. So obviously the plant's function must go on, so it will break down the starch which is present in the leaf, and then it will kind of destarch the plant. And this can be tasted with the help of iodine, because iodine is one of the compound which reacts with the starch and it forms bluish black complex with the iodine. So iodine starch complex is bluish black in color, and iodine itself is yellowish brown in color. So that way, when you add iodine solution to the regular leaf which has starch, it will turn into bluish black color, while the destarched leaf which has no starch or almost very less starch, when you add iodine to it, its color will remain yellowish brown. So that is what is destarching of the leaf. So after this destarching, you take such destarch plant and you cover on either side with these strips of black paper. So something like this. Yeah, the diagram explains it very well. So on the both the sides, that is upper and lower side of the leaf, the strip is attached so that the light does not come in contact with this particular area which is covered. So you keep this plant in sunlight for few hours, and then after few hours the leaf is kind of detached from the plant and the black strip is removed, and then the leaf is boiled in water. This is specifically to remove all the dirt and the soluble compounds, and boiled in alcohol further for removal of the chlorophyll pigment. So you boil in water to remove the solubilized compounds, and then it is boiled in alcohol so that the chlorophyll is removed. So what you get at the end is kind of colorless leaf, not completely colorless, but I would say light green colored leaves. And then at the end you add iodine to this leaf, so the area which was covered with this strip, that means the photosynthesis did not happen there, so it will not turn into bluish black color, or it will still remain yellowish brown after addition of iodine, while the area which was exposed to sunlight and which was not covered, that will form starch due to the process of photosynthesis. So upon addition of iodine solution, it will show bluish black coloration. So that is the simplest experiment to prove that a particular plant needs light to perform the function of photosynthesis. So that is the first experiment. There are several questions which can be asked based on this particular experiment, like why do we need to cover the leaf, or why do we need to add iodine solution, why do we have to boil the leaves in water as well as alcohol and so on. So there are several such questions that can be asked based on this experiment. Does anyone have any question? So I assume this part is relatively simpler. Yes, yes. Huh. Okay, so then the next experiment is the importance of carbon dioxide in photosynthesis. This will prove that carbon dioxide is required for the photosynthesis reaction. Again, in this case, a simpler setup is there. So you take a plant and one of the leaf, you put it in a conical flask or a bottle which has this potassium hydroxide solution, KOH. So now what will happen, and this what we say, the bottle or conical flask is sealed, so there is no contact of the outside air to inside air except this small gap through which the leaf is entering the flask. So this KOH solution will react with the carbon dioxide which is present inside the flask, and that will form a turbid solution. So that is the reaction of KOH with CO2, and because it's a kind of simply strong base versus carbon dioxide reaction. So that forms the kind of carbonate which will create a turbid solution. But again, depends on the amount of carbon dioxide. Sometimes you may not even see turbidity in a solution because the carbon dioxide itself is very less in this air. So and now you expose again this plant. When we take it at the start, it is a destarch plant. Destarch means it has been treated by keeping it in the dark, so the starch within this plant is depleted. So then you take this leaf, put it in the flask which has KOH, and again you keep this plant outside in the sunlight for 3 to 5 hours, which is good enough to do photosynthesis. So what will happen is the part which is outside the flask will perform photosynthesis because it has exposure to air, ultimately to the carbon dioxide, and the part of the leaf which is inside the flask will not have access to the carbon dioxide or air, because whatever inside is there, that will be already reacting with the KOH, and the rest of the part will be just air. What this half of the leaf will need is the carbon dioxide, which will not be present in the inner portion of the flask. And that is when the half of the leaf which is inside the flask will not be able to perform the photosynthesis function, while the outside photosynthesis will happen. So that means starch will be prepared outside. So again you do the same treatment. You take the leaves, you add iodine solution. The part which is exposed to the air will have bluish black color, and the part which is not exposed or part which is inside the flask, that will be acting as that will be showing bluish black, not bluish black, that will show yellowish brown coloration because there is no starch, and that color will be of iodine molecule. So that is another experiment to prove that carbon dioxide is required for the photosynthesis function. Any question on this so far? Again, anyone has any question? Okay, so if not, that's all. This part of carbon cycle is not in your syllabus at all, so we will not be discussing about it. But if you have any questions related to these experiments, you can ask.